Imagine tuning into a Saturday morning cartoon expecting laser fights, quippy heroism, and Cobra Commander screaming, "Retreat!" Only to instead watch your heroes get flung into a dystopian alternative reality where Cobra won, freedom died, and the bones of the G.I. Joe team are literally rotting in the ruins of civilization. No, this wasn't Rick and Morty. This wasn't Dark Side War. This was 1985 G.I. Joe, and it delivered one of the most ambitious, unsettling sci fi stories in animation: Worlds Without End. The episode begins like any other Joe mission: a mysterious Cobra device, a skirmish, a big glowing machine. What could go wrong? Turns out, everything. A flash of light, a rift in reality, and suddenly the team wakes up in what looks like their world, but corrupt, conquered, encoded in Cobra symbolism like a dystopian fashion line gone wild. It's a classic sci-fi setup, but for an 80s cartoon tied to toy sales, this shift was bold. A world where Cobra didn't just invade, they actually won. Right away, the tone shifts. Buildings are in ruins. Civilians are forced to comply with a fascist regime. And the American dollar is now deemed useless. I guess Cobra's crypto scheme finally paid off at the end. This version of Earth is a bleak reminder of what happens when fascism actually succeeds. And then comes the moment that traumatized an entire generation of Joe fans. The Joes discover the remains, the literal skeletons of their alternative selves. Sunbow Animation never went this dark again. Seeing the heroes dead, laying in the ruins of their old headquarters was shocking, emotional, and way beyond anything the show typically portrayed. For a franchise built on endless battles with zero casualties, Worlds Without End broke its own rules, and that's why it sticks. In this alternate timeline, Cobra Commander is far more ruthless, ruling with an iron fist as entire cities fall under harsh martial law. Dreadnought and force patrols stalk the streets, and the impoverished population is reduced to standing in endless food lines just to survive. But the real emotional core comes from the Baroness. This alternate Baroness isn't a cackling villain, she's a grieving survivor, the last ember of resistance, and the only person who still believes in fighting back. She forms a brief, uneasy bond with the Joes, revealing a humanity the regular show rarely explored. Suddenly, these cartoon characters designed to sell action figures feel real. Now, what makes Worlds Without End brilliant isn't just the shock value, it's actually the message. For once, the show doesn't ask, how do we stop Cobra's plan? It asks, what if Cobra already won and there's nothing left to save? The Joes aren't fighting to liberate this world, they're fighting to escape it. Because in this reality, the war is already lost. It's a wrap. And that's the level of maturity that pushed children's animation into new territory. One of the most powerful emotional threads in Worlds Without End comes from Steeler, a character who up to this point often questioned his place in the Joe team. Steeler had been wrestling with doubts, wondering whether the constant battles, constant danger, and constant escalation was even worth it. But in this alternate reality, it forces him to confront something he never expected: a world where the Joes failed because he wasn't there. Well, actually, he was there if you count his alternate self, but as you can tell, he sees firsthand the atrocities Cobra commits under its fascist regime, the oppression, the brutality, the way everyday citizens are crushed under a tyrannical boot. It shakes him, it changes him, and for the first time, Steeler understands exactly why the fight matters. Because in this universe, he doesn't just rejoin the Joe team, he becomes part of the resistance. His decision to stay behind to fight for a world that isn't even his is one of the most profound acts of character progression in the entire Sunbow series. It's a moment that transforms Steeler from a soldier with doubts into a man with purpose. And here's a little detail that adds a delicious layer of course this all makes sense. Writer Martin Pasco, who penned Worlds Without End, previously developed an obscure DC Comics storyline about a terrorist organization called Cobra, spelled with a K, a secretive global cult obsessed with domination, run by a snake-themed overlord. Coincidence? No, not even a little. Pascal knew exactly how to construct a world where a serpentine organization could realistically gain power because he literally written the blueprint for it before. That experience bleeds into Worlds Without End, helping elevate Cobra from cartoon villains to a frighteningly plausible fascist society. This episode becomes a reflection of fate, inevitability, and the idea that even heroes can fail somewhere out there in the multiverse. Heavy shit for a time slot sandwich between Transformers and Muppet Babies. But by the end, the Joes return to their version of Earth, changed, shaken, and aware of a universe where they lost everything. Simply put, Worlds Without End stuck with fans because it dared to be something more, a sci-fi tragedy, a multiverse thriller, and a philosophical thought experiment packaged inside a toy commercial. Decades later, it remains one of the most iconic episodes in G.I. Joe history, not because it was exciting, but because it was haunting. And that's why Worlds Without End still stands as the definite moment where G.I. Joe proved it could tell and truly ambitious stories, even if it meant breaking the hearts of the kids who watched it. And if you enjoyed diving into one of the darkest, boldest stories in G.I. Joe history, do your part for the algorithm resistance. Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow Joe fans, and subscribe for more deep cut retro reviews, sci-fi throwbacks, cult classics, and cartoon history breakdowns, because knowing is half the battle and subscribing is the other half.